Okay. Oh, duh. I need the Facebook link to put in here. I didn't have that. Let's see.
All right. You want me to start letting people in?
Hold on one sec. Let me try and I lost my screen where I was trying to do the okay. I'm trying to do the live stream right now. If you see Walter, definitely.
Oh yeah, I see you, so that must be Walter.
Streaming.
I think I can change his name. Actually.
Oh yeah, he probably logged in under our account instead of just using.
I'll just change it to Walter Crater.
Custom stream sharing required. Okay, so now I can't remember what I did here.
There he is.
I'm trying to remember what I did to get in to the live stream. Because I think I did custom last time, but let me go back and try again. This is the pain of the Zoom. I tried to do YouTube first and tested the other day. And share on the timeline, share to your page. Agape Social Justice, go live.
Oh, you got it.
You see it?
Yeah, it just popped up.
Oh, okay. I'm still on the okay, this means being recorded. Meeting is now live stream. Okay, good. All right. Welcome everyone. It is 7:01 and we do have all of our panelists with us, so we will get started. To our viewing audience on Facebook, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for our live stream. We will have participants joining us as well via the Zoom platform, and they'll be coming in periodically through the meeting. For those of you who are joining us, please stay on mute, and we will let you know when the opportunity comes for questions to be asked. So if you are joining us, please mute yourself. So this is a community conversation on policing. And for those of you who have been watching the news, there are a number of stories that have really triggered a lot of people in the last week or so. Not only have we had mass shootings, not only did we see the police being called on a young woman who simply didn't get a McDonald's order correct, and she was trying to address that, and McDonald's staff called the police on her. We also witnessed the senseless death of a young man by the name of Tyre Nichols. And this has actually been one of those incidents, just like George Floyd, that I believe has raised the consciousness of America yet again. And so many people are asking for us to have a conversation, for us to process what we saw. And in addition to seeing another murder take place at the hands of the police, what's different in terms of what we see on the national stage is that the majority of the officers who were on the scene and who participated happen to be African-American Black officers as well. And so we're going to have a candid conversation tonight. This is part 2. Some of these panelists have been with me before and talked about what they experienced in law enforcement. So I'm just going to kick it off and have them do a 30-second introduction. And after that, we will go into our questions. For the last 20 or 30 minutes or so, we will go into Q&A. from our audience that's on Zoom and any questions that we may see online. Again, my name is Stephanie Kreider. I am the host of Agape Social Justice Talk Show. I am also a national facilitator for racial healing and solidarity. I am a community advocate and organizer. I do that work in a number of different spaces related to criminal justice, education, you name it. There is much work to be done. And I'm going to actually pass it to Walt Kreider. Walter is my husband. We've been married for over 20 years. So not only am I an activist in this space, I am the wife of a law enforcement professional. And so that brings a unique dynamic and perspective as well. So Walter, are you in a position where you can take about 30 seconds and introduce yourself?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Well, first off, I want to thank you for going ahead with the initiative to bring us all together for another conversation on this hot topic, no doubt. But yeah, my name is Walt Kreider, retired Michigan State Police. Prior to that, I was a Highland Park police officer, so I had some experience in terms of urban street policing, as well as, again, on a state level. I spent a good portion of my career with the Michigan State Police as a community liaison. I had the pleasure to serve the community on several different levels. I worked with churches, I worked with schools, community groups, sorority groups, CEOs and board of directors in terms of presentations that were law enforcement related. And probably the most outstanding thing in my career in terms of what has left the greatest impact on me is really having an opportunity through the course of about 3 years. We took about 200 kids up to the Michigan State Police Training Academy for a youth leadership thing. That was really challenging and it was really rewarding. But that's my background.
Thank you. I am going to go to Derek Barker because thanks to Derek for reaching out. That's why we are having tonight's discussion. So really want to thank you and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself as well.
Oh, thank you very much, Stephanie. I'll make sure I call you Stephanie now and not Miss.
Yes, not Mrs. Kreider.
I've been chastised about that already. Mine is going to be much shorter because you know your husband can be a bit long-winded. So
Look,
my name is Derek Barker. I'm a retired state police sergeant, and currently I am a Black business owner, CEO of my own private investigation company, full disclosure, investigative services. And I pretty much do, I work with the Wayne County Indigent Defense Department, as well as the Oakland County Indigent Defense Office, working with criminal defense attorneys conducting criminal defense investigations.
thank you. I appreciate that. And Ms. Tawana Powell, would you introduce yourself? Let us know your background as well as what you're currently doing today.
So my name is Tawana Powell. I am a retired first lieutenant and former commander of intern Michigan State Police Professional Standards Section, which is commonly referred to as Internal Affairs. I was a member of the Michigan State Police for 26 years. I am also experienced with urban policing. I worked on the Detroit Police multi-jurisdictional violent crime and carjacking task force. I also worked in assisting Highland Park and Inkster with some of their violent crimes, incidences. I was a detective sergeant with the state police for almost 16 years, where I worked with, I was on the FBI Public Corruption Task Force. I have investigated uses of forces, officer-involved shootings, allegations of public corruption on both the state and the federal level. I have investigated all levels of public officials. chiefs of police, mayors, law enforcement officers. It runs the gamut. Since I have retired from the state police, I have done independent reviews and provided my opinions of uses of forces. And I have been involved in investigations and compliance.
Thank you so much. Darzell, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Good evening, panel. Thanks for having me, Stephanie. My name is Darzell Hall, and I did 25 years with the Michigan State Police, working in various capacities from the State Police Intense Traffic Enforcement, which was headed up by Detective Sergeant Barker during that time. I also worked for 5 years in the Michigan State Police Motor Unit. I worked in the undercover capacity for 6 years, and then on to the forensic laboratory. I retired in 2020. Since my retirement, I have taken up a position of a youth mentor and counselor in the city of Detroit. We pretty much deal with children, high-risk kids from the age of 6 all the way up until 18 years of age. I also am a business owner at this time in transportation, but my heart is with the community and being a youth mentor and a coach for the youth.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And Harold Love, you wear multiple hats right now, so share with us your background and the things that you're currently doing today.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good evening, everyone. So I served 25 years with Michigan State Police in different capacities, from trooper to captain. Retired as captain in 2013. I currently work in my private practice, providing counseling and mental health services to public safety professionals in general, but also members of the general public. And I serve on the board of directors for the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion. Those are the main things I'm doing. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and part of the discussion this evening.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Well, welcome everyone. Let's just jump right in. And for those of you who are just joining us, one of the things that I mentioned is that I have had conversations with each of these individuals in the past, and we keep it real. And so the intention tonight is for us to have a candid conversation about the Tyre Nichols murder, as well as what we see in policing with excessive force and what we think we need to do moving forward. And the latter part of our session tonight, we will open it up to our audience so that they can ask questions. Darzell, do you mind if I start with you? We've had a multitude of conversations as it relates to this topic and how it has affected not only the community, but has affected you all in terms of being individuals who, Walter always says, I was Black before I was blue. And so talk to us a little bit about what that's like for you to experience the Tyre Nichols case as a retiree, as a Black man, and as someone who is also an advocate and activist for this work.
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is when you have situations like the Nichols incident, it really the wall was starting to break down a little bit between police and the community. But when you have these kind of situations, there goes that wall right back up again, and it divides the community from law enforcement. It's really disheartening, and the public trust is really starting to wane behind this kind of incident. And it's even more troubling due to the fact that it happened in Memphis, Tennessee, a city that's predominantly African-American, with a predominantly African-American police force. When I first watched the video, it took a couple of days for me to watch the video, but when I watched the video, it reeked of unprofessionalism. And it seems like out of everybody on the scene, I'm speaking law enforcement, it seems like no one actually took charge. You know, I mean, everyone has been trained to deal with these kind of situations. It shouldn't have even been an intense situation. It was 5 officers on the scene initially to one particular motorist, and it just went from 0 to 1,000 like in a millisecond. And Mr. Nichols, for better use of a better word, he didn't stand a chance. This is not how law enforcement is trained. And when you have incidents like this, like I say, the community just loses, they'll lose all hope in law enforcement's ability to be impartial and to have a doctrine of fairness when dealing with the citizens they're tasked to protect.
Right, absolutely. Derek, what was your initial reaction when you saw or did you see the video, and what was your initial reaction? You're on mute.
We good now?
Yes.
Okay. You know, when I initially reached out to you, I hadn't even watched the videos, any of the videos. In fact, my sister had mentioned on Facebook that I should watch it because of, you know, my experience in law enforcement and the number of years I had, you know, served in the state police. But I wasn't sure I wanted to see it. I've seen it so many times, and, you know, you just get tired. You know, it's an old story, and you get tired of seeing and watching our young Black men and women being shot down, whatever the case may be, being shot in the car multiple times by police for reaching for your wallet, you know. So it took me a while to come around, and then I finally watched it. I think it was MSNBC had a clip that was about 26 minutes. I actually went through and I did a timeline, a chronology of everything that occurred by the minute for the entire 26 minutes. And it was probably the most disturbing incident or case of man's inhumanity to man that I had ever seen. It just, they literally beat this young man to death. He's 100 yards away from his home, calling his mother. And, you know, it was really disturbing. But it took me a while because you can't unsee things that you've seen. And I didn't know if I really wanted that, you know, it was just vexed my spirit. But I did finally watch it, and just seeing, as Dar said, the unprofessionalism. The officers are walking around using profanity, bragging in some cases about how they had beat this young man. One of the officers said, I hit him with straight jabs multiple times, as though that's something to be proud of. Another one of the officers in the video was walking around with his collapsible baton, proud of the fact that he had struck this young man multiple times. They bragged about macing him. I've never seen such unprofessionalism. And they talked amongst themselves as though they didn't even realize they were on video.
Right.
I mean, the language that was used was absolutely incredible. And just, you know, to see that young man, he's laying there, they prop him up on the car, and he falls over because he's totally lifeless. At that point, beaten to the point of incapacitation. And they come over to him, and nobody's rendered in any, he went a total of 8 minutes, from about 9 minutes to 17 minutes. Not one officer, which they are required to do, render any type of assistance, no medical assistance. And in fact, what they said was, well, EMS is on its way, but it's going to take a while. Well, at that point, someone there, with all them officers there, nobody cared enough to render any medical assistance or first aid to this young man. And they just let him lay there. And then, because he had been beaten so bad, bleeding profusely from about the face, he fell over again. And they would come over as though it was some kind of joke and said, man, get up, get up. Well, there was nothing left in his body. There was no strength left in his body that would allow him to get up.
Right.
And they let him lay there until, the paramedics finally came and tended to him.
Right.
This-
So I think for me, when I saw that they kept pulling him up, and like almost cussing him out, because he kept slouching over, in my mind, I'm saying, don't they realize he's injured? I mean, it's still hard for me even today to process that. You would think that any individual who would see somebody in that condition will have the common sense and the decency to at least have some empathy in that moment. Walter, I'm going to come to you and get your reaction in terms of when, I think I might have even been the person who was telling you that this happened, but when you saw the video, what was your initial reaction? And how is this even possible that you have officers who could do this, who could perpetuate this to even somebody within the Black community when they should know what that feels like?
Like Derek, when I finally got around to viewing it, because I wasn't in a hurry to see what I already knew, meaning that I can remember one of my old senior training officers said, "I'm never surprised, I'm only disappointed." So I wasn't necessarily in a hurry to see it, but when I saw it, the first thing that came to mind is that now the truth has been revealed in terms of the savagery that can be perpetuated upon other human beings at the hands of the police. And obviously I noticed that, those were African-American officers, and what we've been, dealing with in terms of in the media has been, European-American officers on that of African-American people and so on and so forth. But it was no surprise to me. I was not necessarily waiting for the truth to come out, but I knew that the truth would soon be revealed, that this is not just, and I'm not taking up for anybody, that this is not just a European American police officer versus Black people thing, but this is across the board when we talk about systemic in terms of what law enforcement unfortunately has a tendency to breed, and that hopefully we can deal with right now. And another thing that came to mind to me is that I can't even imagine what Malice Green endured. We didn't have the luxury of social media and camera phones and surveillance videos and all that kind of stuff when Malice Green was beaten to death by Butson and Nevers. But when you heard reports in the news as well as from other police officers and how those people reacted at the scene in terms of Butson and Nevers, one report was that he threw up, that Butson or Nevers threw up because they were so high and they had just beat this man and they were just exhausted. So when I saw that, that took me right back to Malice Green and that horrendous incident. But I'm, like I said, I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed. But now that the truth is out, now we must deal with it in terms of what law enforcement, what can come forth in law enforcement, to the people that we're supposed to be protecting.
Right. Thank you. Tawana, I'm going to come to you because we've had a lot of conversations about, is it training? Is it not training? And because that's the go-to, right, for a lot of people who aren't familiar with the system or the origin of law enforcement. What was your initial reaction, number one? And number two, is this a training issue, or what do you think the problem is? Why are we seeing what we're seeing play out over and over and over again? And then I'll pass you a third one. From your perspective as an executive in internal affairs, what should happen in these incidents when we see this occur?
Well, when you asked me, what was my feelings when I saw it, everybody on this panel that know me know I have given birth to no child, but I've raised many. And I have 4 Black men that I've raised and pray for every day, every day. And I even shared with you all how, yes, people focus on the fact when it's a white officer versus, a Black officer doing something to a Black citizen. But I have had those boys come home and know they've never been arrested. They've never been in trouble. They are all graduates from college and still furthering their education. And they don't ride around with guns and drugs and all that in their car. We've had candid conversations since they were preteens to tell them how to act if they ever was in a car and got stopped, and so many different things. So when I saw it, I was heartbroken, because that's most of the time how I did my investigations and police work. I always visualized this could be my family. What if this was mine? And so I think for all of us, who see that kind of activity, we see our own selves and family members and things like that in those situations. But, from my perspective, things like this came under my purview. When I did criminal investigations related to allegations like this and incidences like this, and when I was the commander of internal affairs. People say training, but I mean, you have to be inhumane to do some of this. Like what training can you get that teaches you not to be a broken soul, right? So we could talk about training, and there's a lot we don't know here, because when I saw it, the first thing I said is, this is not the first time. This is not, they're so brazen, they're so cocky. This is not the first time they've done this. And then when you see in the news and stuff where other people say they called and made complaints, they were blown off. This is what I was passionate about when I was commander of internal affairs. You have to listen to the complaints that come in, because for a chief of police or the head of an agency, through those complaints and things of that nature, your citizens are telling you what your eyes don't see, right? That's what your citizens are telling you. And so you have a duty and a responsibility to listen to them and take the necessary steps to handle the situation. Because think about it, had those phone calls come in, which there's no record of, except for the citizen who gave CNN their phone records to prove they called, right? But when there's no documentation within the agency to say these many calls came in related to this unit, then that's a failure on the head of the agency's, part, So everybody want to scream training, training, training. You can train, you can give anybody, you say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink it. Talk about us. We were all trained in the state police a certain way, and is it bad apples that go out to a field training officer that say, hey, you do it like this, we hide it, we do this, we do that. It's so many things that run the gamut here. But looking at that, we watched a murder happen, right? On film. We watched somebody, and we can say, well, we don't know all the facts, and we don't. We don't know if there was reckless driving. We don't know, but let's play the devil's advocate. Let's say the initial stop was above board. Let's say he was reckless driving. They asked him to get out the car. They pulled him out the car. He took off running. Their problem is they handcuffed that man and then beat that man savagely. Their problem is every officer knows deadly force, when you kick somebody in the head, you hit somebody in the head, that is deadly force. And the question comes in, was the use of force proportionate with the level of resistance, right? And you heard the officers together, getting their false narratives is what we call it. We're getting their false narratives of the events that occurred together. Did you see he grabbed my gun? Did he grab at my gun? Did you see this? Did you see that? And everybody's watching this in shocked and amazement, you know, from what you actually saw versus what's being said, you know, and you know, we don't know, you know, we don't have no use of force reports. They even have that where each officer who uses force documents the force and the reason for using force. It's a lot we don't have, right? It's a lot we don't know, but we can't, don't ask us not to believe our lying eyes, right? Don't ask us not to believe what we see in that video. So,
Yeah.
and then how well is the department's policies written, right? How well are they written? Are they written to such a way that they're you know, that there's attestations of acknowledgement, you know, just to say, oh, it's a policy. But what does the policy say? How well is it written? You know, and things of that nature. A lot of things come to mind because of what I did and how I did it, you know, but I in my opinion, the problem is they handcuffed that man and beat that man. And then they didn't give him any aid. They watched that man roll around. He rolled around on the ground in agony. When they got through beating him, they dragged him like he was a wet dog and propped him up against that car. That's humane. That's inhumane. And I tell you, there is no amount of training. That's in your, that's what you call dirty to your core.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty there. And thank you for lifting the issue of the internal policies too, because I think a lot of times when we're having conversations with the community, people are always talking about laws that we need to put in place, which is very true. I heard a legislator on one of the national news networks today talking about, well, we don't need to create a federal law. You know, each state needs to handle it on their own. And I know that's always a debate among people, but it's like we can never get to the point of having a law, but very rarely do you hear people talking about meeting with those individual agencies and looking at those policies and practices that they have in place and seeing what needs to be changed. Because you're right, it's not until you look at it that you realize that some things are inadequate and just don't measure up, and it gives people a pass.
Well, I know that there a lot of times heads of agencies and the whole, you know, ploy to make the officers' actions look good from this standpoint, all those games that's been played, you know, when I've done criminal investigations and things, you know, that's what a prosecutor do. You know, you go, you get trained as an investigator, you go get their training records, you solidify what they were taught in the academy, you solidify that they've been trained on an annual basis about the uses of force and deadly force and what to do and not to do. The funny part about it is, I didn't see anything, and we're dealing with grainy videos and things of that nature. You know, what about the tactics, that defensive tactics that's taught? You know, I don't know if they use the force continuum down there. We can talk about what we know here in Michigan, right? I don't know what standard Tennessee has as far as uses of force and escalation and de-escalation in their standards, you know, because we have MCOs in Michigan, the Council on Law Enforcement Standards here, right? So I don't know what their standards are. It's a lot we don't know, but what's in the department policy is vital to a prosecutor stand, because you want to see that they violated department policy, right? And then couple that with the law, and then people want it to be on the state level versus the federal level, because that's why the federal laws are there, because just like with Chauvin, he was tried on the state level, right? But he was tried on the federal laws, right? So that's why you need that separate law for the federal standard and the state standard. He wasn't tried for the same thing twice. He was tried because that's, you know, you can't do that. He was tried for federal laws on one level and state laws on another level. But those department policies need to be solid, ironclad. You need to have attestations in place to confirm that the officer knows those policies, read those policies, and understand the parameters in which, if they violate those policies, what they're subject to.
Okay. So Harold, with your background in mental health, I'm pretty sure you're seeing this through multiple lenses. I mean, you were part of command staff, you are a Black man, you have an understanding of trauma and what that experience looks like. You actually work to service and support first responders who have mental health challenges. How did you process all of this coming from your background?
Yeah, well, my first response was, oh my God. You know, I saw it for the first time this past weekend. And so I want to speak from a leadership, perspective. Every one of, the state police panel members here, I learned a great deal throughout my career from each and every one of them. But I also had, the privilege of serving as their commander. And as a captain, I had 6 counties in Southeast Michigan under my command and nearly 400 state police personnel, dealing with some of the worst criminals, the most violent criminals, some of the most volatile situations, spontaneous situations, you name it. And not one of them has ever engaged in anything close to this. And from a leadership perspective, if it's not condemned, it's condoned. Okay. And it's accountability. We talk about, cameras, we talk about policy, we talk about training. If accountability is not there, all of that stuff is just a moot point. If I'm not going to hold you accountable for breaking or violating a rule, then, the rule is, it might as well just be a blank piece of paper. All right. And when we talk about standards and laws and things like that, the International Association of Chiefs of Police puts out guidelines on uses of force, on you name it, anything that we deal with in law enforcement, it's out there, and there are guidelines that are put out there. But from, again, a leadership perspective, if we allow small things to go unchecked, swearing at people, like Tawana said, this is not the first time this happened. There are probably a whole lot of busted heads and bloody noses and broken limbs, in the path of those officers who who perpetrated this homicide on this young man. We talk about mental health and the cumulative stress that officers deal with, working in violent situations, or just seeing some of the things that most people don't even know exist out there, the trauma and things like that. Even with that, nothing justifies what happened here. We have an amazing amount of authority when it comes to, law enforcement. The police officer, that position in our country, there is no other position in our country that gives a person the authority to take a person's life. The police officers have that authority when it's justified. All right. Even a judge doesn't have that authority without a trial. And so with that authority comes an awesome amount of responsibility. So little things like depriving people of their freedom to even move about, that should be, when it's not justified, it should be checked. Swearing at somebody, it should be checked. Hitting somebody, mishandling somebody, it should be checked. Do we, get in situations where there's such an adrenaline rush after a chase or foot chase, car chase, or whatever? Yes, we get in those situations, and it takes a lot of constraint to not, just pummel a person or, plow them into the ground, that sort of thing. Even when that happens, you have to be able to flip the switch and say, okay, I got him, now let's let due process start taking its place. We're not going to punish this person out on the road. So I've said a lot there, but
No, I'm really glad you said the latter part too, because I've been watching comments online. I went back and watched different snippets of the video, and I saw where the officers were like out of breath. They stopped and they were out of breath. And there's some people saying, they were just upset because, he made them run. They were out of shape. They got angry. You know what I mean? And
for contempt of cop.
Right. And it almost appeared as if the anger just continued to escalate. How dare you run away from me? How dare you make me chase you, sort of thing. And it seems like there's a loss of control, but I'm in agreement with you all in that not only did people come forward and say, hey, I was subjected to this behavior before. Typically, when I see these cases, I immediately think they've done this before, because there's this posture that people take on that you begin to recognize. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the school system or any environment you're talking about. It's the same thing. People take on this posture of, I can say and do whatever I want to do. Why? Because they've done it before, or they know that other people have done it, and there's no accountability whatsoever. And I'm of the mindset that the key to making this change is accountability. But the question that the community always has is, how do we do that? Like, we don't know what to do to protect ourselves. We don't know what to do to have that level of accountability. So some people said, let me educate myself about my rights and my laws, right? And we saw a surge of people exercising their rights right there within traffic stops. Well, then that then escalates, because for some reason, people take offense to you citing what your rights are. And then now you're subjected to a situation where you would think it would shift and they would back off. Now they want to hurt you even more. You call in and you try to report it and nothing's done. I have personally called some of the highest officials and reached out to their people, and there's no follow-up. So what do we do? I'm at a loss too, just like the community.
Well, I
And
think
any
that,
of you can jump in.
well,
Go ahead.
I think
Go
that we need, we really do need to jump into the 21st century in terms of, aside from what's going on from it, with inside the individual people that don't deserve to be the police, but we need to jump into the 21st century when we talk about accountability. There's enough technology out there. When we get a Super Bowl that comes to town, we have so much technology at our disposal that from a satellite we can read. We can read the letters off of a dang on coffee cup, as somebody that's walking around the stadium. So we really need to put technology to work for law enforcement in terms of accountability. That means, body cams that not only you can't shut off, but won't shut off. You don't put them on your chest, you put them on your head. And then you have a dispatch unit that not just sits up there and tells you where to go, but they actually monitor real-time activity. So in a situation like that, where you see 5 officers that are going left, you can go ahead and automatically dispatch another unit to break this to break this thing up. So we need to put technology to use for us on an accountability side. And then when we talk about the unions, don't get me wrong, I'm pro-union by all means, but we have to also deal with the unions in terms of the power that they have as it relates to keeping these individuals on the job. We all know, and we don't have to pick cases, but we all know individuals that unfortunately the union saved their positions, and then they ended up in a critical incident. One in particular that resulted in a similar situation that we're talking about right now. And real quick, I got a real solution for the unions, and this affects everybody on this panel because we're all receiving a pension. Instead of taxing that of the taxpayers when we have a lawsuit that obviously is going to come from Tyre Nichols, well, don't pin it on the back of the citizens in terms of increasing their taxes. You know what you do? You go after that pension plan. That's right, because it's a cash cow that's sitting up there in the pension. And if you hit the pensions with those lawsuits, sooner or later, people in that of the union are going to take notice, and guess what? They're going to make those real decisions when it comes when you talk about defending somebody that actually should be dismissed.
Mhm.
Good point. And that's along the lines of people talking about qualified immunity. Everybody doesn't deserve qualified immunity. They do what they want. You have typically, outside of the Tyre Nichols case, typically what you see is law enforcement having days before they even have to talk to anybody and getting their story straight. And there's all this preparation. And I've never really understood, why those rights trump, really, I feel like providing the proper care for a case. It has just never made sense to me. But I agree. I think when we can put in those layers of individual accountability, then I think we will start to see more of a change. Harold, I think you were trying to jump in, and then
Yeah,
Darzel.
well, yeah, I want to tell what, first of all, please don't touch my pension. But beyond that, you talked about accountability from an internal perspective, how do we hold people accountable within? But Stephanie, your question was, how does a community hold the police departments and administrations accountable? And I look at some of our community activists, people who have, I guess, some weight behind them to be able to call people out, call administrators out. The Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion, for instance, Steve Spreitzer, in his 60s, white male, but when you talk about a champion for social justice, he is one that will, take anybody to task. And, I know for a fact, because he calls me and gets advice on how do I contact this person? How do I approach this person? And when you have something like that, someone like that, you've got Pastor Mo, you used to have Ron Scott, God rest his soul, Coalition on Police Brutality. There were many times where he would call me just to have a conversation about some things, and we would address those things, So there are, as a police commander, a lot of times you hate to see those folks coming, but they help you in keeping your people accountable. They help you in getting a beat or understanding of what's going on in your organization or your agency. And the unfortunate part is a lot of administrators don't want to know. I don't want the trouble. I don't want the bad press and that sort of thing. But again, that's that accountability piece and not condemning the behavior. So it might as well be condoned. And that's the perception that the public has of law enforcement. When it's not condemned, it's condoned. And then when you read some of the print, or the comments behind the electronic articles and online articles and things like that, and the bonehead comments that we hear from so many people in the law enforcement community about, well, what did he do? Or if he had just done this, he would have been all right, and that sort of thing. And we have to condemn that bad behavior, from the outside, from the inside, you name it. It's just wrong. And when we call it for what it is, then we can increase, trust, that will allow us to open up dialogue with the community and have them continue to be our eyes out there as administrators to help us police ourselves and make the necessary adjustments and changes that we need to stop these kind of things.
Yeah, appreciate that. Darzel, I know you and I have talked before about the citizen oversight committees and, wanting to put more of those in place. What's your thought now in terms of those oversight committees and any other way that we can create some accountability?
Well, they're needed now today more than ever. You spoke on qualified immunity, and qualified immunity has become a crutch. It pretty much insulates law enforcement officials throughout their duties. And like Walt touched on, if you start coming after these individuals' pensions or whatever personally, or you start taking money from these agencies funding to run certain schools or to have certain things happen, you have to affect these departments directly. You can't just, because a lot of departments have what's called an insurance fund. So when they get sued, it's going to come from the insurance fund. So we're not making any changes that way. I mean, it's just the next man up. And the calls that Memphis PD had been fielding for this one particular unit, it was a booster unit similar to what Detroit used to have called Stress or Big Four, the Big Four back in the day. They're considered, the heavy hitters. They come, you send them to high crime areas to try to curtail the criminal activity. But in this particular incident, when you don't field those calls of the citizens' complaints or concerns, it's gonna come back and bite you. Either you address it up front or you're gonna deal with it like we're doing now on the tail end. And today, and unfortunately, end up costing a young man his life. I mean, those officers out there that I seen on camera, they were the criminals that night. They showed zero professionalism. I mean, swearing in the camera, they weren't concerned about getting Mr. Nichols under control. One of the elements of arrest is control. It took them a while for them to actually subdue him and actually contain him. They were more concerned about kicking him, punching him, macing him, shooting him with a taser. I mean, it was like it was a vendetta almost. It was like it was a personal attack on him. These men raised their right hand to swear and protect. I mean, I couldn't tell that night. I do want to commend the chief. The incident happened on the 7th, and Chief Davis, I think it was 13 days later, 5 of those officers were terminated. And I think it's up to 7 today. But you just can't have this kind of unprofessionalism just running amok, because the citizens ultimately will lose faith in law enforcement's ability to impartially and safely protect and serve.
Yeah, I mean, for some of us, the faith is gone. You know, it is gone. There is fear. There's a distrust. There is a deep pain, a wound, trauma that has occurred, you know, because it happens over and over and over again. And I may not have ever shared this publicly, but, you know, for me, you know, I carry a lot of guilt sometimes, because I even feel like, as the spouse of a law enforcement, you know, professional who knows there are people on the force, you know, if you and when you all get in a huddle, or I get in a huddle with you all, there's names rattled off, you know, in terms of, we know who those individuals are who do not belong on the force. But yet, as Walter said, the union continues to give them a layer of protection, or, you know, whatever the circumstances are, they continue to go out there and they continue to misbehave. And, you know, I knew this, right, for years, but I feel like I feel like I wish I had more of a voice that I have today, you know, the confidence I have today to speak up and speak out about it, because I wonder sometimes how many people have been harmed and abused because we didn't speak up, or because we didn't fight enough. And I want to put the question out there to you all, because one of the things I hear a lot is, why aren't Black officers addressing this issue internally? And if they are, why aren't they fighting harder? What's the reality when you go to command staff and say, hey, I saw so-and-so, you know, did whatever out here in the public, or we got these complaints coming in. What happens when you try to address it?
Please let me take this one.
Okay.
I was the commander of internal affairs, and I didn't have a voice. As the commander of internal affairs, having individuals conduct investigations, doing investigations myself, presenting them to HR and command and the higher ups in the agency, it is a fight. It is a fight. It is no secret amongst us that I was not ready to retire. At the expense of me, somebody who is decorated, hardworking, never did anything but made the agency look good. I was addressing the misconduct in the agency, assisting the colonel in the effort of keeping the integrity of the agency. And at the I was, you know, I was, you know, expendable. You know, I went head to head with a captain in the agency over a derelict trooper that assaulted a citizen in the street. I retire and leave because of all the things that's going on, and then turn around and he does it to somebody else. And he kept his course going. He's no longer with the agency. I say all this to say, as the commander of internal affairs, I'm pointing out these things, these videos, this misconduct. It's going up the ladder. I'm fighting with commanders in the field because they want to keep this person. They want to act like this didn't happen. They don't want to address it. So when you ask that question and you say you hold some kind of guilt, don't. Because even when it's presented to them and they're informed of what's going on, they want to sweep it under the rug until, boom, somebody gets killed, right? Till somebody gets, it's not addressed. It's like, we didn't know this. We didn't know this. BS. You knew it. There's an alert system that's telling you it's happening. And now that this 15-year-old is killed, you know, these are patterns. That's why I tell you, these officers, this is not the first time. Now, whether there's a record of theirs, see, let me tell you something about stopping people and beating people up. If you're doing that to somebody who had something, who was dirty or doing something wrong, the chances of them reporting it is like, you know what? I was wrong, so not nobody gonna believe me. Don't nobody care. People are fearful to report it. They think they're gonna be retaliated against. It runs the gamut. But I'm telling you, the way those officers acted out there that day, and if we're partners and we're running around and we're chasing somebody and once somebody get excited, that's what that partner is there for. Tap you out. Hey, check yourself. You know, you get them away from that person. That person that you got under arrest, your prisoner, is your responsibility, because the jail's not going to take a beat up prisoner like that, you know, and you have accountability for that. So about accountability, it has to be unilateral. And then you have like the unions fighting for, you know, you have people that get terminated. The union fight, bring them back. They back out there. It's a wheel it's a rolling wheel that's never ending. And if somebody has the answer to it, I'd like to meet them.
And a lot of times, that kind of behavior is incentivized by bringing in raw numbers, raw arrest numbers, ticket numbers, or whatever have you. So there was a time where myself and a couple of other department members brought to a particular lieutenant's attention of a rogue outfit that was running pretty much amok in the city of Detroit. They were working topside in some of the most high crime areas, east and west side, but they were out there using heavy hand tactics, and a lot of the stuff they were doing, clearly, we don't know how they were getting away with it. But when we brought this particular command officer's attention, you can kind of tell that they were hoping that nothing ever really hit the fan where they would have to answer for it. And unfortunately, something did happen. A 15-year-old lost his life as a result. But I think when you implement these medals for whoever gets the most felony arrests, or whoever writes this many citations, when you incentivize these things, this kind of behavior is more often is going to come about. And people in Memphis, they were down 500 officers just a year and a half ago when Chief Davis took over. Okay, so it's kind of like she may have even heard some things, some grumblings, but you know, what are you going to do when you're down 500 officers? I guess they just keep their fingers crossed and hope nothing happens, but it's going to happen, and it's going to cost you in the long run. And someone potentially can lose their life like they did in this incident here. There's no reason, there's no medal or no incentive that you could give me that's going to make me just brush my integrity aside and go out there and treat the public, the tax-paying public, I might add, in a manner that they don't deserve.
And let me say this. Mm-hmm. These units that's running around policing by any means necessary are dangerous, because you're giving them carte blanche to treat people any kind of way. And I read between the lines in her statement that she made about that unit, the Scorpion unit.
Correct.
That unit is disbanded for now. They're gonna rename that unit. You hear what I'm saying? She said the name. Go back and read that quote of what she said. She said, we agree the name Scorpion has been tainted. That unit might be disbanded while the fire is hot, but that unit is going to be renamed. I know it because I did an investigation of a unit within the state police that was rogue cops running around, violating people's rights, taking their property and all kinds of stuff. They don't get rid of the unit, they rename the unit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that was a lot to process. I do appreciate all of you being as candid and as vulnerable as you're being, because I would tell you it has been quite frustrating for me and many other activists when we try to tell people that this is the reality and this is what's happening within law enforcement, and people just don't want to believe it, especially our suburban friends, because that's not their experience. You know, when they have encounters with law enforcement, it's pleasant experiences, you know, when they're getting a safety talk in the school, or when somebody's coming and, you know, rescuing a pet or something like that. It's a completely different world. So I really appreciate you all keeping it real. If anyone has anything else they want to share, feel free. We're going to turn it to Q&A shortly. And I don't see questions in the chat right now, but I just want to say to individuals who may have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will call on you to get your question asked.
I do want to say, you know, it's unfortunate that it's such a black eye, because we all sit here. I look across this screen and I've worked with everybody. I've helped everybody. Everybody's helped me. We've worked together. We've worked with some great officers of all races in our agency. You know, we had some great officers, but there is derelict officers, as we can see, that exist in the law enforcement world. And it seems like it's getting more prominent. And maybe not that it's getting more prominent, but it's the evidence, the video cameras, the cell phone cameras and things of that nature. The incident with the young lady at McDonald's, I was mortified. That lady was in handcuffs and that man just punched her in the face. Her face was bloodied. It is just horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah, I saw that case too, and I don't see a lot of people talking about it. I mean, maybe I've missed it from working, but you know, I can't imagine going to a restaurant and just simply, rightfully so, telling somebody you're upset, you know, I paid for this food and you didn't give me what I paid for. And because there's a verbal exchange, the police gets called, then the police come. I saw how she was talking to them simply about what happened. And then next thing you know, you want to question me, you want my ID, you want all this stuff. And what does that do? That triggers us. It makes us feel fearful, like, well, what are you going to do when you get my name? Well, what are you going to do next? And because she wanted to just remove herself from it, she wasn't under arrest. And then now you get beat up. So it's, you know, people feel like they don't know what to do anymore. What are we supposed to do? When we, you know, I know Walter trained, and I'm sure many of you have, just like Tawana, you said, even your own family members, you train on what to do when you encounter the police. And I'm still at a loss sometimes. I mean, when I've been pulled over in nearby areas where we live, I feel like they say things to me to try to trigger me to get upset. How much have you been drinking? Do you have a dead body in the car? You know, they just, and my child was in the car one time, you know, when they said these things. And then I asked other people, well, when you've been pulled over for your tail light being out or whatever, do you get asked these questions? And it's not the same thing. And so it's almost like there's this attempt to want to escalate the situation. And so I'm just at a loss. Last time I got pulled over for, I think my headlight was out or something, I ended up telling the guy, no, I don't have a dead body in the car. I don't operate like that. I'm actually a law enforcement family, or something to that extent, I said. And then immediately his demeanor changed, right? Then it was questions about Walter and what did he do and that sort of thing. But it's just, you know, I'm just at a loss. I'm at a loss. But I do want to, I see we have a question here. What about changing the vetting process? That's a really good question, Linda. Walter, I want to come to you. And then Harold, do I see you raising your hand too with the vetting? Okay. Walter, I don't know if you mentioned this early on, but I know you did some recruiting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you were one of the people tapped to diversify Michigan State Police, because there are very few people of color on the force. But I know that you had quite a bit of frustration because you would specifically go to places where you could recruit people with a diverse background. And then, there were individuals who were qualified, and then something would happen and they could never get in. So talk about the vetting process and what you see happening there.
Well, Sergeant Barker and I, Derek, we both did a whole lot of recruiting, and we did a lot of background investigations, and actually, Derek, he did a background on the individual that we've been speaking of today, in terms of ended up in a critical incident, and individual ended up losing their life.
Mm.
But we could do all the work in the world in terms of recruiting.
Well, please tell me you guys didn't say that person should be on the force.
Oh, no. He'll tell you a story if he wants to.
Okay.
He'll tell you a story. But no, we could do all the good work that we do in terms of publicity, going to the right places. And I mean, what I mean by the right places, I mean, we're not hanging out at the bars trying to recruit people, but going to college classes, going to barbershops, going to churches, all those type of things. And we can put those people in the system, but once they get into the system, what I found is that somehow, some way, they were vetted out. I mean, individuals that, from a preliminary standpoint, in terms of recruiting them and talking to them on a preliminary basis, they seem to be good candidates. But then within the system itself, they disappear. And there was talk at one time there was going to be a class action suit in terms of the recruiting policy. I mean, matter of fact, I was even deposed by an attorney that was going to bring forth a class action suit, but that has yet to materialize. I don't know whatever happened to it, but there's certainly a breakdown as it relates to, within my former department, the Michigan State Police, back then. And I think we still probably have it now when you look at the number of African Americans and women of minorities that make it into the department, that something happens within the recruiting system once they get beyond the application portion and they disappear. So go ahead, Derek, if you want to share your situation.
Yeah, Derek, if you want to add the other details of that case, and then we'll go to Harold.
Mute button.
Yeah, I would love to address that. The gentleman that we're talking about, when you do the background, I did his background. But what you have to say in the background is that you did not find anything that would disqualify them from proceeding further in the process. Meaning that I didn't find any felonies in his background, which was basically, an automatic disqualifier. So that's what I wrote, that I didn't find anything. However, I think that there's certain areas of the background that I uncovered that should be further explored before considering hiring him. And they hired him anyway. He was a Canton police officer prior to that. All of the indicators were there that suggested he would not make a good police officer, certainly not one that should be serving the great state of Michigan on behalf of the Michigan State Police. But they hired him anyway, and as has been discussed previously, he got into trouble. The 14-year-old young man on the east side of Detroit that was riding on the ATV, and he leaned out the window and shot this young man with the taser, caused him to lose control of the vehicle, and subsequently lost his life. That young man never should have been in the state police. And I certainly did not recommend him. And I gave them as much information as I could possibly give them. But I can't say that he was, there was nothing there to disqualify him.
Sure.
And they hired him anyway. And then, of course, subsequently, he wound up creating all kinds of problems. And a young man wanted life. Yeah.
Harold, you wanted to,
Yeah, I just wanted to
comment on
respond to the general question of what about vetting? So I service about 40 agencies right now. I do pre-employment psychological evaluations. I read their background investigations. They go through a clinical interview. I have 2 other former law enforcement, now clinicians on my staff. And, you know, the requirements in Michigan is that a department must ensure that a candidate is free of mental, emotional, and psychological instability. Now the requirement is that must be decided by a physician or a psychologist. There are many agencies that will allow the physician, the same physician who's doing a physical exam, to sign off on a mental exam, and that's sufficient in Michigan. The guidelines from the International Association of Chiefs of Police is that it should be conducted with certain tests and conducted by a mental health professional, psychologist, social worker, licensed professional counselor, et cetera. So it's really loose. You know, those are guidelines. The standards and requirements don't match up with the guidelines. And then there are agencies that don't conduct a thorough background investigation. That's where you're going to find your most information on a candidate, you know, by talking with people and by looking through their history and their background. When they come to me, they've already been given a conditional offer of employment. And the scope of what I'm asked to do is to ensure that the candidate is free of mental, emotional, and psychological instability. And that's it. You know, so many people can pass that. They are free of those instabilities when they come in, but there are certain behaviors or characteristics that can be, you know, ascertained from a very thorough and in-depth background investigation, you know, that might, you know, raise some flags and say, this is not somebody that we want to hire. And then again, the culture that they go into and what's condoned, what people are held accountable for and not, that you know, that can leave room for an officer to change and become corrupt. And then now they're engaging in this very destructive and dangerous behavior.
so let me ask you this question. Why do we have resistance in terms of creating a statewide or a national database? Why can't we have a system that's in place so that anybody who tries to become a first responder, you can go into the system, look at the records, you know, see where they came from? And I'm not saying give access to, you know, the citizens, but I'm saying, you know, HR departments, professionals who should have access to this information. Why is there a resistance to do that?
Well, you've got HIPAA laws, you got Americans with Disabilities Act, you know, there's so many protections that people have when it comes to their medical information. And when you're talking about psychological, you know, issues and things like that, that's all medical information. So there's a lot of red tape, you know, that gets in the way of that. I'm sure there's some other things too that I don't know anything about or understand, but that is one big one right there, the sharing of information and the protection of information.
Now,
Okay.
Stephanie, are you speaking more from a mental health aspect or more from a rogue or over aggressive police officer that's been fired?
Yeah, I'm thinking of like misbehavior, you know,
Right,
like
right, right.
you might not necessarily need to put down all their medical history
Right.
or you know, to a certain degree. I mean, if there's some mental instability and there's some incidents that occurred, it seems like that needs to be documented somewhere, so they just can't go to another state or for that matter, another city, you know,
Right.
and be able to get employment.
Well, you
Sure.
know, there are agencies here in Michigan that hire officers who's been fired from other law enforcement agencies for misbehaving
Mhm.
or whatever the case may be, right? So they say that they don't have the funds to train their own officers. So these officers already hold a certification, right? It's they might get fired from an agency, but they might not lose their certification because they haven't been charged with a felony or a 93-day misdemeanor or something to that effect, right? So you have agencies that's full of officers who have been terminated from other agencies. You know, let's take the William Melendez incident in Inkster. You remember the officer that beat the Black motorist in the street? I think it was 2000, maybe 2015, 14 or 15. William Melendez had worked for the Detroit Police Department. He had been investigated and attempted prosecution by the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, by the FBI. He wound up working for both Inkster and Highland Park. Well, when he was in Inkster, he stopped the motorist and beat him for no reason, just senseless, just like what we're seeing with the Tyre case. He identified a civil infraction, traffic stop, and wind up pulling the guy out the car and beating him senseless. So he wind up getting convicted on that one and losing his certification at that time, even going to prison for that. But look, all the people he had, it had been claims that he had planted drugs on citizens, he had assaulted citizens, you know, and he was able to, and been criminally charged, that, you know, although he beat the cases or whatever, there was evidence on a preponderance of evidence basis, which is much less of a standard than the reasonable doubt from a criminal standpoint. And he was still able to keep his law enforcement certification and jump from agency to agency. So when you talk about the vetting process, to the young lady that asked the question about vetting, you know, it's people that pass psychological evaluations that have issues. People look at people in terms of the things they've achieved. That gentleman that Derek Barker was talking about, he had a law degree. You know, people look at people in their level of education, at different things like that. You know, what is the formula? When people pass psychological evaluations and they act in that manner, when people pass backgrounds, they act in that manner. You know, what is the formula for dissecting a human being and the evil that lies dormant inside of them and to a certain point? We don't know that formula. So I don't know what the answer is to vetting in a different way.
Yes, it's probably harder on the initial hire, but like Stephanie said, I would be all, and I'm sure most citizens would be all for a federal database for officers that have been convicted of doing officer misconduct or police brutality or something along those lines. You do have a lot of agencies that are so underfunded that, you know, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. They'll take anything they can get to don on the badge and the gun. And they may see it as saving money initially, but you're not, because in this Inkster case we're talking about, you're either gonna pay on the front end or you're gonna pay on the back end. But I mean, I really think in this day and age, when I joined the department in '95, there was like a 1.5 year waiting list. Nowadays, very, very few people want to be in law enforcement. I mean, probably every law enforcement agency across the nation, at least overwhelming majority, are understaffed. So, I mean, you have to make the job more attractive, in my opinion, and you have to actually break out the checkbook and offer a more competitive wage, because, you know, a lot of people aren't going to go risk their lives to do a job where they can go and work in a Fortune 500 company and make more money and know they're coming home at the end of their shift. So with that vetting process, to go back to that, I do believe there should be some sort of federal database for officers that have been terminated for police misconduct. I mean, that way at least we can somewhat begin to get a handle. You don't want to just keep recycling these old, you know, these officers that have been convicted of, and you know they're not going to serve honorably. So I mean, to me, something should be done.
Right.
I'm sorry, let me just say this. MCOs did change their standard after the William Melendez incident. They did change their standard. They did. But like you say, somebody had to get badly hurt.
Right. So we have, I don't know who this question is best directed to, but we have a question about the union. So what would the process entail to have police union reforms? Would the reform take place at the state or county level? Will officers need to vote for the reform? And either of you can answer this question, and then I'll go to James Booker for our final question after this.
Well, so I'll speak from a commander's standpoint, you know, regarding, reforming a union. I don't know what that process would be, but when it comes to the agreement between the union and the agency, the organization, that's done in collective bargaining. And so they sit down to the table and bargain for things, you know, pension, benefits, things like that. And the department or the organization then says, well, we'll give you this, but we want this, so that's where those changes happen. Those things happen as far as unions are concerned. Maybe someone else may know about, reform or something that can be imposed by the state. But
So is it safe to say then, if you have the agency talking to the union, neither of them want any bad press? So it's not likely that they're going to be on the side of the citizen in terms of advocating for what we want. So does that mean that that's where getting legislation passed is kind of required to be able to get the outcome that we're looking for?
I believe so. When I was thinking MCO's, Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, their guidelines are legislated in. So those changes are made by the legislature. So I would assume that, that would be the place to put more, I guess, meat on the bone, so to speak, of guidelines and policies and things like that that govern how police agencies operate.
Okay, thank you. Booker.
Hey.
See you.
Hi, James Booker. I'm currently with the Wayne County Sheriff Department, work at the prosecutor's office specifically for Tim Worthy as a EPU, and also a retired Detroit police officer after, 24 years. So collectively 36 years of law enforcement and still running. A couple things I've heard during our conversation tonight, and everything I've heard is true. But two things that come to my mind in terms of law enforcement is the fact that there is a culture within law enforcement that create these avenues of violence. I've worked DPD, 30 series, booster car, all of that, and I understand the methodology in terms of how we're supposed to operate. But getting back to those officers that created this heinous act against the brother here, what you say, Steph?
Tyre. Mm-hmm.
Tyre, yeah. Those brothers, they know what the continuum is. They passed the qualifications, but once they got on the job, and to my understanding, they had all of them were 5 years or less. They were taught in terms of how to react to the citizens of Tennessee where they were, right? And so they were able to operate without impunity in terms of creating this scorpion type mentality that the leaders at the top gave them, right? And so I just think that it's a systemic culture that across the country with police and how we operate, especially in those specialized units. One thing I've not heard tonight was the fact that there was no supervisors on the scene. I'm talking about from their unit to the EMS, or who are all of the responders that responded. No, there was no leadership. So those guys were just operating out there at will, doing what they wanted to do. And I think that is one of the major problems across the country, is the fact that these guys are given the opportunity to police in that way. That's where the rubber hits the road, right? We have to be able to stop it at the root. And politics and legislatures and all of that other stuff, unfortunately, comes into play, and it's a perpetuation across law enforcement. And until we look at that in that lens, we're going to continue to have these same problems. I've been in many situations where I've seen a beat down in progress, but because of who I was and my values and the fact that I grew up in the city, I had to say stop it, right? right? That's enough, right? And that was not done. And unfortunately, the young man's life was lost. If there would have been a supervisor on duty, or a supervisor made the scene and say, "What you got?" Then maybe that might have been prevented. But I've watched the video, and it's been 2, 3, 4 days now, and I've not heard the fact that there was a supervisor anywhere, right? And so those guys were exactly who they were. They were road cops, and they gave this individual a good gang style beatdown, and they killed that guy. They murdered that guy, right? And so we have to. I've heard all of the MCOs and all of this, the good laws and procedures and stuff like that. All of that's out the window when we're dealing with people that we recruit and allow them to operate in this sphere without impunity, right? That's where the rubber hits the road. And I was trying not to say nothing, but I had to, because I grew up on the street that Malice Green was killed on. I knew Malice Green's family. I lived right around the corner, right? Nevers and Butson beat Malice Green over the head with a tail light. They crushed his skull, right? And so that happened back in the 80s. I think Walt said something about that. And here we are in 2023, and we're still dealing with the same foolishness.
Yeah.
And until we really get serious about making the main thing, and come from a advocacy standpoint in terms of what our community deserves, the type of policing our community deserve, unfortunately, we're going to still be dealing with the same problem. And I'm gonna leave it right there. Great
Thank you.
conversation
brother.
tonight.
Yeah.
Great
Thank you. I
conversation.
appreciate that.
Brother Booker, I agree with you 100%. And see, the culture in terms of law enforcement, even from a patrol standpoint, there's a lot of autonomy out there in terms of working the road. See, we have to do away with that. I mean, I enjoyed it in terms of having that autonomy. You get out there with a partner, and you and your partner, you can do a good job, but you're basically free range. Only thing I want free range is free range chicken. We don't need no more free range law enforcement. We need that accountability there. We need to bring 21st century into this thing. We need to monitor the police while they're out there and see exactly what they're doing, and have accountable supervisors that can respond at a moment's notice to put a lid on that thing.
Absolutely. I
So,
agree 100%.
yeah, absolutely. I'm just typing in the chat, since we're down to our last few minutes, for anyone who has a remaining question that we won't have time to get to. If you want to put that in the chat, I'll get answers for you. And then we'll put that on our Facebook page, on the Agape Social Justice page. So feel free, if you have any remaining thoughts, drop it in. I'm going to save the chat. I do want to comment in terms of also with this culture, and also with the fact that we've been seeing this happen for so long, and how we get to today. And another thing that I haven't heard lifted, that's typically in these conversations, is talking about the origin of policing. And many people talk about the fact that, you had those individuals who conducted slave patrols. And so a lot of the behaviors that we encounter and experience today, for me, it literally feels like, when somebody's stopping me and they want to know where I've been and where I'm going and all these other questions, to me, it almost feels like, what's really different today than when I had to, people had to show a paper or get some sort of permission to be able to go about their own business, mind their own business, and go about life. I'm experiencing that kind of stuff today. And I think that we also have to deal with the fact that we have these environments that have been created, that have been built upon by white supremacy, and that conditioning happens and gets infused into the minds and the behavior of the people who operate in these units, and not just in the units, and throughout the department. And I think somebody used the term today where they said a gang. And that's something that Walter has said to me time and time and time again. There's like this gang mentality, this sense of belonging that people crave. And it's like, once you're a part of that family, once you're a part of that gang unit, all bets are off. It's like you doing what, those types of individuals who are doing that day in and day out, it's almost like they become like these animals. We have a friend who calls people thug animals, and it's almost like you begin to take on a different personality. You become a different type of human being, if that's even what you are when you do that type of work. And I would really like to see some research done in that regard, in terms of what's happening to individuals once they do a particular type of job for a certain amount of time, and how that kind of rewires your thinking and changes your behavior. The other thing I will say, which I know could open a can of worms, but I'm just going to put it out here before we leave. And that is that I want to say that I honestly believe that if this were not people of color, and then specifically Black people who were dying over and over and over again, and this was majority white culture, we would not continue having these conversations year after year after year. Why? Because people would have raised up and said, I won't tolerate this behavior, whether it's Bloomfield or West Bloomfield or Birmingham or Troy or wherever you are. But because it's us, people have the luxury of being able to not watch, to be able to turn off the news, to carry on their lives. And so while I see my friends and family posting that they're grieving, I can look to my neighbors and my friends who are good people, but they're posting about their food and their pets. And it's like we live in two completely different worlds. And until you have the comfortable being uncomfortable and inconvenienced, I just really don't see like the shift that needs to take place. Right now, the burden is on us. It's not on majority culture. But if majority culture will love us enough to walk with us and stand with us and fight, not behind us, but in front of us to make this change, I think that we would see more of what it is that we're looking for. But I want to thank everybody who is watching online on the Facebook page, everyone who joined us through Zoom, those of you who will watch this recording at a later time, and obviously to each of our panelists who came on today. I know it's not easy to do what you've done. I know that you get a bad rap just because you chose this profession, but I want to thank you for being honorable in the work that you've done for so many years, the work that you continue to do. I tell everybody, I have friends in law enforcement who are good people who fight for change and will continue to fight for change. So that blanket statement that everybody's bad is not true. Is the system bad? Yes, it is. And let's figure out how we can all continue to work together to change it. But thank you all so much. Thank you for your questions to those on Zoom. We will make sure we follow up online and stay engaged, keep fighting. Oh, I have to put a plug out. If you have not followed or liked, I have to get better at this. You have not followed or liked the Agape Social Justice page, feel free to do so. Contact your friends, click invite and invite other people to join the page. Right now, this week, Walter, my husband, was interviewed about why he got into law enforcement, what he saw in law enforcement. That is available on RICC TV, RICC.TV. You can watch it online or via Roku or Apple TV. It is Agape Social Justice is the talk show. Thank you all again. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, and everybody that was on the panel. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
I'm gonna switch over to stop the live real quick and I'll be back. All right, so Right, stop the live share. Kahima, did you have a question? Oh, okay.